Imagine waking up one ordinary morning in your quiet neighborhood. Same street, same porch, same house you worked decades to pay off. You make some coffee, step outside, and see an official-looking envelope in your mailbox. No bank logo, no court stamp you recognize, just a government seal. You open it, thinking it's nothing important. Then you read one line that freezes you in place. You are required to vacate this property. No crime mentioned. No unpaid loan. No warning signs at all before this day. Just a decision that's already been made. In that moment, a belief that millions of Americans live by quietly collapses, the belief that owning your home means you have absolute control. Most of us grow up hearing one powerful idea. If you buy a house, it's yours. It's your castle, your safe place, your ultimate security. For people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, a home isn't an investment trick or a quick flip, it's a lifetime achievement. It represents years of early mornings, overtime shifts, skipped vacations, careful budgeting, and delayed dreams, all locked into four walls and a roof. So when the government steps in and says, "We need this land," it doesn't just take property. It takes away your certainty. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never read in the fine print. In America, homeownership has conditions, legal conditions. And those conditions don't care how long you've lived there, how peacefully you've paid your taxes, or how emotionally attached you are to your home. There is a quiet, legal, and powerful mechanism that allows the government to force you out, all while claiming it's acting for the public good. The words sound technical and harmless, but buried deep inside those documents are lines that translate into real, life-altering consequences for real families. Roads need to be widened, bridges need replacing, flood zones need to be cleared, cities need revitalization. And suddenly, a neighborhood that has existed peacefully for generations is labeled as being in the way. What shocks people the most isn't the legal power itself, it's the logic behind it. The government doesn't argue that you did something wrong. It argues that something bigger than you matters more than you. But on the ground, it means elderly couples packing up boxes they never thought they'd have to touch again. It means families scrambling to find new housing in markets they can no longer afford. It means people being told, politely and legally, that the life they built is no longer compatible with a plan they were never even invited to vote on. Many of the people affected by this aren't uninformed or reckless. They paid their property taxes on time. They followed all the local laws. They maintained their homes perfectly. Some even renovated recently, thinking they were improving their future. And then comes the letter, or the appraisal visit, or the voluntary offer that doesn't feel voluntary at all. Then there's another layer that makes this even harder to accept: compensation. On paper, homeowners are promised fair market value. That phrase sounds comforting, until you realize what it often means in practice. Market value doesn't account for your emotional attachment. It doesn't cover the cost of relocating in a much hotter real estate market. It doesn't replace your neighbors, your routines, your memories, or your stability. And it definitely doesn't guarantee you'll be able to buy a similar home nearby. For older homeowners especially, being forced to move isn't just an inconvenience, it's a major disruption to their health, their community, and their peace of mind. For decades, these cases were treated as isolated incidents. One town here, one highway project there. It was easy to ignore if it wasn't happening in your zip code. But, over time, a pattern has emerged. Infrastructure expansion, urban redevelopment, climate-related managed retreat. The reasons are different, but the result is the same. Ordinary people discovering that legal ownership does not mean absolute control. And because these actions are wrapped in complex legal language and long timelines, public outrage rarely explodes all at once. The moment people realize something is wrong is rarely dramatic. There are no sirens, no shouting officials, no one banging on your door. It usually begins with something that looks harmless: a survey notice, a request for inspection, a flyer about a community meeting slipped under your door. Most people just ignore it. Some might attend out of curiosity. Almost no one panics. And that's exactly why this works. In many cases, the first official contact isn't even a warning. Or a notice saying your property falls within a potential project boundary. The language is intentionally soft. Words like potential, proposed, under review. Psychologically, this is designed to keep you calm. It buys time. And while you're busy living your normal life, the real decisions are already moving forward somewhere else. Then comes the appraisal visit. This is where the tension quietly spikes. The moment people realize something is wrong is rarely dramatic. There are no sirens, no shouting officials, no one banging on your door. It usually begins with something harmless looking: a survey notice, a request for inspection, a flyer for a community meeting slipped under your door. Most people ignore it. Some might attend out of curiosity. Almost no one panics. And that's exactly why it works. In many cases, the first official contact isn't even called a warning. It's framed as information. A letter explaining that the area is being studied. A notice saying your property falls within a potential project boundary. The language is deliberately soft. Words like potential, proposed, under review. Psychologically, this keeps people calm. It buys time, and while you're busy living your normal life, the real decisions are already moving forward somewhere else. Then comes the appraisal visit. This is where the tension quietly spikes. Someone from the city or a contracted firm asks to assess your property's value. They tell you it's routine. They tell you it doesn't mean anything yet. But for those who've been through it, this is the moment denial starts to crack. Appraisals aren't done for fun. They're done to prepare numbers. And numbers mean planning. At this stage, many people still believe they have control. They think, I can say no. They think, nothing is final. They think, they'll just choose another route. That belief isn't stupidity, it's normal human optimism. The system relies on it. Because, while homeowners are debating possibilities, agencies are locking in routes, budgets, and timelines. By the time the public language shifts from proposed to approved, resistance becomes expensive, exhausting, and often pointless. The next letter is the one people remember forever. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten. It explains, calmly, politely. It states that the project has been approved and your property has been identified as necessary. Sometimes the word necessary is replaced with required. Sometimes it's hidden behind phrases, like in the public interest. But the meaning is the same. This is no longer a discussion. It's a process. For many homeowners, especially older ones, this is where shock sets in. Not anger, yet pure shock. The brain struggles to accept that a house you own outright, with decades of tax records and legal paperwork, can still be taken. People reread the letter again and again, searching for a mistake. They call family. They call lawyers. They call neighbors. And that's when they realize they're not alone. The same envelope showed up on multiple streets, sometimes entire blocks. Community meetings follow, but they're not what you imagine. These are not debates where outcomes are decided. They are explanations of decisions already made. Officials stand behind presentation boards showing maps, timelines, and compensation frameworks. There are question and answer sessions, yes, but the core question everyone wants answered is never on the table. Can this be stopped? The honest answer is usually no, but it's rarely said directly. Instead, people are guided toward options. Accept the offer early and receive relocation assistance. Contest the valuation and risk delays. Hire legal help and spend years in court with no guarantee. On paper, these are choices. In reality, they are variations of surrender. The power imbalance is built into the system. The government has time, money, and legal backing. Individual homeowners have emotion, attachment, and limited energy. What makes these situations so painful is how uneven the outcomes are. Some people negotiate slightly better compensation. Others don't. Some move nearby. Others are priced out of their own communities. Longtime neighbors scatter. Social circles collapse. For people in their 40s and 50s, rebuilding that sense of place isn't easy. For those older, it can feel impossible. Then there's the quiet pressure that never makes headlines. Once a project is announced, areas marked for acquisition begin to decay. Maintenance drops, investment stops, renters leave, the perception of crime rises. Even before any legal seizure happens, the neighborhood starts feeling temporary. Progress moves forward, clean and documented, while loss remains personal and undocumented. Not to prove some hidden agenda, but to reveal a structural reality. Governments used to justify taking land by talking about roads and redevelopment. But now, they've found a much more powerful argument: safety. It's easy to protest a highway cutting through your neighborhood. It's a lot harder to argue with a flood, a wildfire, or a rising sea. This is where the language shifts, and where resistance often begins to crumble. Instead of getting letters about construction, homeowners start receiving notices about risk. Your property is in a newly assessed floodplain. Climate models have been updated. Your insurance has been reclassified. Evacuation standards have changed. On the surface, this all sounds responsible, even protective. Who doesn't want to keep people safe? But hidden within these assessments is a subtle transfer of power. The conversation is no longer about choice or development. It's about necessity and survival. It usually starts with a map. An updated flood map, a coastal erosion chart, or a fire risk zone. These maps don't ask for your opinion. They simply redefine your reality. A house that was considered safe for decades is suddenly inside a bright red boundary. Once that happens, everything changes. Your insurance premiums skyrocket, or your policy is dropped altogether. Getting or maintaining a mortgage becomes nearly impossible. Your property value plummets. Suddenly, staying in your home becomes financially irrational long before it's legally forbidden. Then comes the buyout offer. It's presented as help, a lifeline, a chance to get out before disaster strikes. Officials will stress that it's completely voluntary. They'll talk about federal assistance, relocation packages, and long-term safety. For many people, especially those already struggling, it feels like the only logical choice. But here's the catch. Once enough people accept the buyouts, the entire area gets officially marked for retreat. When that label sticks, you're no longer living in a neighborhood. You're living in a zone that's slated for disappearance. At this point, even if the government doesn't use eminent domain, the result is the same. Services start to degrade. Schools close. Emergency response times get longer. The city stops maintaining the infrastructure. They don't have to force you out. They just make staying there impossible. On paper, no one was evicted. In reality, an entire community was pushed out. This is where a deep sense of betrayal sets in. Not because safety isn't important, but because the rules were changed without their consent. These people weren't reckless. They bought homes that were legally approved, insured, and taxed. Many were even encouraged to build there. Now, decades later, they're told the risk is unacceptable, and the burden to adapt falls entirely on them. What makes this kind of displacement so effective is the moral framing. If you resist, you're not just being stubborn, you're being irresponsible. You're ignoring the science. You're endangering first responders. You're standing in the way of progress. That social pressure is immense, and it silences opposition. People don't want to be called selfish for wanting to stay in the home where they raised their family. And unlike a classic eminent domain case, there's often no big courtroom showdown. It's just a slow, quiet tightening of conditions until leaving feels like the only sane option. Many people sign agreements they don't fully understand, just to escape the pressure. By the time they have regrets, the program is over, the neighborhood is gone, and there's no going back. There's also the uncomfortable truth about inequality. Wealthier residents might have second homes or the resources for a legal fight. But for working-class families and the elderly, the options are limited. Buyout offers are typically based on the property's pre-decline value, not what it costs to replace your life somewhere else. So you're compensated for what you had, not what you need to start over. And what happens to the land that was cleared for safety? It creates a growing distrust, not in science or safety itself, but in how those concepts are wielded as tools. People start asking tough questions. If the scientific models change, do our fundamental rights change with them? They say, staying here no longer makes sense. The result is the same, but accountability is blurred. By the time a community realizes what's truly happening, the story has already been written. The area is unsafe. The residents who stay are holdouts. The conversation is no longer about rights, but about risk management. And in that debate, a lifetime of memories and a sense of home carry very little weight. When people ask if something like this could happen again, they're already asking the wrong question. The real question isn't if but where it becomes easiest next. Systems don't repeat actions randomly. They repeat them where resistance is lowest, justification is strongest, and the cost is easiest to defend. Once displacement proves to be a workable solution, it stops being an exception and starts becoming a tool in the toolbox. The pattern is already visible if you know where to look. Governments don't typically start by targeting places with unified communities, strong legal resources, and political influence. They start where the opposition is fragmented. Think about aging neighborhoods, mixed-income areas, or places that get labeled as at risk, underutilized, or in transition. These labels might sound neutral, but they are strategic. They are designed to prepare the public narrative long before any concrete action is taken. By the time most people notice what's happening, the story has already been written for them. What's different now compared to the past is the speed. The definition of what counts as public interest evolves. What was once unthinkable becomes administratively reasonable. And when rules change gradually like this, people adapt without ever clearly giving their consent. This is where complacency does the most damage. People assume the warnings will be loud and clear. They assume there will be plenty of time to organize and fight back. They assume fairness will ultimately intervene. But fairness isn't a built-in mechanism, it's an expectation. Systems don't respond to our expectations. They respond to incentives, authority, and precedent. If previous actions faced limited resistance and were legally successful, there's no internal reason for the system to stop repeating them. Now, this doesn't mean mass removals are imminent everywhere. That kind of fear is lazy and inaccurate, but it does mean that the security you feel just from owning property is weaker than you might believe. Real protection comes from awareness, legal preparedness, community cohesion, and getting involved early, not from hope. Waiting until an official notice arrives in your mailbox is the worst possible strategy, because by that point, most of your leverage is already gone. The hardest truth to accept is this: most people affected by these processes did nothing wrong. They followed the rules as they existed at the time. They planned responsibly. They trusted in the permanence of their homes and communities, and that trust was logical. It was just outdated. Modern governance prioritizes flexibility. Land use must adapt. Risks must be managed. Economic growth must continue. Within those broad goals, the stability of an individual homeowner is often treated as negotiable. So, the future doesn't hinge on whether displacement is legal. That question has largely been answered. The future hinges on how quietly it can happen, how convincingly it can be justified, and how willing the public is to look away when it doesn't affect them directly. History shows that once a method works without significant backlash, it spreads not because of malice, but because of efficiency. If there's a warning here, it's not a dramatic one. It's practical. Pay attention before your attention is demanded of you. Read the local planning notices. Attend the town hall meetings, especially early in the process. Take the time to understand zoning laws, risk classifications, and your city's long-term development proposals, because the most common sentence spoken by people who lose their homes isn't one of anger or outrage. It is something far simpler and more unsettling. I just didn't think this would ever apply to us. That belief, more than any single policy, is what makes the whole system work. Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, consider subscribing for more content like this.